All right, Megan, you're good to go.
All right, the title of this talk is creating a partnership between families, providers, all team members, and early intervention. I'm Megan Roberts. I'm an assistant professor at Northwestern University, also a speech-language pathologist. My area of research focuses on parent-implemented interventions. Because of that, I spend a lot of time thinking about teaming and how we think about what teams should be, the role of parents, the role of providers, the role of support providers, and how we can best interact with one another. So this is a hard kind of talk because I definitely don't think I'm an expert in this, and I'm definitely constantly trying to improve my ability to be an effective team member. So here are kind of the questions that sort of in my brain was guiding what I wanted to talk about today. My goal is to talk for about 30 minutes, mainly because I don't love talking, and then the last bit I'd love to think about any particular difficult interactions or difficult teams and maybe problem solve some of those specific issues with everybody. So the first question being, how do we create strong teams and partnerships? What do we do when people disagree? What are some communication strategies that can help build positive relationships? And then I'm going to talk a little bit about health-giving strategies and specifically how do we facilitate that. So I think any relationship is tricky, whether it's with your partner, your best friend, a team member. It takes a lot of work. Real relationships, truly relationships rely on people being vulnerable to a certain degree. Vulnerable in that they check their ego at the door, that they're okay for feedback, they're okay for conflict, they're okay with disagreements, and they feel comfortable. You as an individual feel comfortable in your own skin to be able to say, even if we don't agree, that's okay, I'm still okay. And so here are some of the things that I like to think about when I'm working with young clinicians and how to be part of a team. So the first part is really just being explicit about expectations. I tell this story of how I was teaching this undergrad class. Just bear with me, I love a good tangent. I was teaching this undergrad class, and I got the worst course reviews of my life. And then I did a little experiment. And the next year, at the very beginning of the class, I said to them, listen, I'm super intense. I talk fast. I walk around the room. I get so passionate about working with families. So it's just who I am. It's just this is my style. At any point in time, I'm too intense. I'm too crazy. I talk too fast. I walk too fast. Just say, Meg, slow down, and I will. That, I didn't change anything other than the class, other than that one thing of setting the expectations, and it completely changed their perception of me. And it was fascinating, just that one little behavior of like, okay, what do I expect to get out of this course? What do you expect to get out of this course? Same thing with teams. Like, what are we expecting? Who is the boss of this team? Maybe there's no boss. What are you wanting to get out of this? I'll never forget another time we were talking. I was on a team, this happened to be with autism and early intervention. And it was like, who is the expert in communication? And, well, of course, I'm a speech pathologist, so I thought I was the expert in communication. Turns out the ABA therapist thought she was the expert in communication. Well, then we take a kid with hearing loss. We have the DTH. We have the speech pathologist. You know, who is in charge of language? And what if you disagree with the language approach? And then kind of how do we work through that? I think another thing is being really explicit about what you want the relationship to look like. Like, how do you want to function in a team? How do you want to make decisions? How are you going to resolve disagreements? How do you communicate? Different people communicate in different ways. I tend to be an introvert. When I am like overwhelmed or struggling, I go internal. And so I tell people that, like, if I'm quiet, it's because I'm thinking. It's not because I'm mad. It's just because I need to process this information. And I don't process information out loud. So knowing yourself and knowing your own, how you process information helps other team members be able to reflect, okay, she's quiet, not because she's standoffish or she's mad, she's just really trying to work through this in her own way. And then kind of how do we set goals? Different people have different goals, and what does that mean? You know, as a speech pathologist, I always tend to put language first, and I sometimes butt heads, to be honest, with auditory verbal therapists sometimes, because they sometimes will do things that I don't necessarily agree with related to covering covering mouths and wanting to work on the auditory input. And when we sit down and we talk, I'm like, well, why are you doing that? You're not teaching language. And they're like, well, I don't mean to be teaching language. I'm trying to teach, like, the learning of the speech sounds. And I'm like, okay, that totally makes sense. Like, I get that, but I thought you were doing something else. And so then I can get to this really sweet spot in the relationship where I was making these assumptions that weren't necessarily true. And then we have these really meaningful discussions about, like, what is language and how do we promote that and how do we do it from different standpoints and what is the active ingredient and why are we doing this, what evidence supports that. And we can all just say, okay, we're all in this, we all care about the same outcome, which is the kid and the family. Now how do we all get on the same page to support that relationship? So specifically, there are 7 things that are related to effective partnerships: competence, respect, trust, commitment, equality, advocacy, and communication. And I'll talk a little bit about each of these because they're kind of necessary in an effective partnership. So the first is competence, and this is really, you know, in order to be effective, you have to bring to the table a certain level of knowledge about your content area. So this, in my mind, is in several domains. The first of which is providing appropriate education. So this may be a therapist really needs to be able to individualize their approach, their instruction to meet the family and the child's needs. Same thing with you know, parent supporters. So anytime we're trying to navigate the relationship, we want to be able to know, okay, this is what these are my skills, these are my limitations, and here how I'm going to work within the context of the team. I think there's a desire to always continue to learn. I mean, that's why you guys are all, you have team meetings, you want to learn new things, you're constantly trying to say, okay, how can I be a better team member? That's, I would say, one of the most critical ingredients that I have found in terms of teaming is the commitment that, well, I'm not perfect. And who wants to be perfect? That would be so boring if I already had my whole life figured out and I already was where I wanted to be as a human. This is about the ability to say, I know I need to continue to work on things. What is the thing I need to be working on? And to be open to feedback and constructive criticism, right? To be able to not be defensive and say, you know what, you're right, I can work on that a little bit better. I think the other is, the last part is setting expectations that are high for families and for children, but also not kind of avoiding this concept of like false despair. So it's about having a vision for the future that fuels great expectations, but also isn't unrealistic for the family. So when we do this, when we model high expectations, we model for parents and for providers that they also can have high expectations for kids. The next element of an effective partnership is respect. So everybody on the team, families, professionals, regard each other with esteem. I talk a lot about culture in my classes, and I think a lot about culture. I choose to look at culture at the unit of the family. I believe that every family has a unique culture that has strengths and preferences and priorities and assumptions, and that if we create a relationship that's honest and direct and supportive, then we can talk about issues. I think there's no issue that you can't talk about as long as it's in the context of respect. Affirming strengths. So saying, wow, you know, this is something I noticed that you're really good at, whether it's a provider or a parent, builds that relationship and makes them feel confident. Treating people with dignity, that they're honored, that their opinion is worthy, is really important. I would ask a question here, but I have to keep talking. I'll ask the question and this thing gives you the answer. Have you ever been in a situation in which it wasn't the fact that you needed to be right or your decision needed to be the one that the team went with, but you just felt like you needed to be heard? That's the part here, is that with respect, it's that we respect everyone's opinion, and that together we want to hear everyone's point of view, and then ultimately as a team we'll make a decision. And that, I think, if I were to pick one thing that predicts effective teaming, is the ability to just get to make sure that everyone is heard, even if we don't go with one of those opinions, that everybody had a chance to voice their concerns or voice their opinion or preferences. The next element is commitment. and clearly at, 9 o'clock at night, that's not a problem for y'all. Can't believe I still say y'all. I've been out of Tennessee for 3 years now. Comes back every now and then. But a commitment that what we do is the most amazing thing. I mean, it is the most exhausting and amazing thing, because what we do with families, it's more than just work, right? It's this commitment to having this impact. It's an amazing, amazing job and responsibility that we have. And with that comes kind of the requirement that we have to be sensitive to emotional needs, available and accessible, and really kind of go above and beyond. We talk about, I talk about this in my class with my students of, what happens when a parent, breaks down or gets really upset during a speech and language session. It's uncomfortable, but within that moment, being committed to that family beyond just the goals of the speech therapy session is important. You're committed to this family. You're committed to being part of a team. And when you do that, your role may change depending on the needs of the other team members or the family in that moment. And to be a good team member means really identifying in that moment what is needed and being able to fill those needs as best you can. The next area is equality. So this is the thing I love. This is my favorite thing to talk about. I love asking people who is the expert. I think particularly new clinicians feel they're nervous, they're great, and they're so excited, and I love them, but they also feel like they have to prove themselves. And with that comes this sometimes tendency to want to have the power, right? To want to be the person that gives the advice, because it's powerful. It's a powerful feeling to know something and to be able to help somebody. But what I would argue is what is really important, particularly for families, is this sense of equality, the condition under which families and professionals, everybody feels like they have an equal say in this, and that the power share, it's everybody shares the power, and we have this group synergy in which everybody contributes, but that we make decisions kind of as a group. What also equality does is it fosters empowerment at all levels. Everybody on the team feels like they have a role and that they have the ability to do what their job is to meet the children and families' needs. It also requires a certain level of flexibility, right? So in order to be able to say, okay, I'm one of many, I may have to be flexible in my thinking of, like, what is my role in this moment, or in my case, in the speech therapy session. I have to be flexible in my understanding of what that means and what that role means, and what my impact may be in that moment may be different than what I came into the session thinking I was going to be doing, or coming into the team meeting. Another element is advocacy. So this is about advocating for what you yourself believe in, advocating for the family, advocating for the child. My least favorite thing is people who pass the buck, right? So when things get hard, oh, let's bring in this consult, or let's do this. And I always, and I believe in consults, I believe in outside opinions, but I also believe that it's our role as a primary team member to support and scaffold the parents through other things, other referrals that they might need, and that it's our primary job to make sure that those outside experiences are positive, that they have the support, that it went okay, that they connected with this new provider, because we're their primary support, and it's important that they trust us. We want to together document kind of areas of need or problems. We want to align ourselves with either other providers or other groups that kind of have a similar way of approaching these. And then with regard to conflict, we want to be able, and I'll talk a lot about this later, to use communication skills that resolve conflict, right? So we want all of this advocacy is in the context of we want to advocate for families in a way that minimizes conflict. Another element is trust. I read a quote the other day that trust is the highest level of intimacy, and it really is. To truly trust someone requires several things. It's having confidence in their ability that they're going to say what they're going to do what they said, you trust their judgment, and that you believe that what they're saying is true. if you say you're going to do something, follow through, being reliable, whether that's working with a provider or working with a family. It's important to follow through, as well as it is to obviously maintain confidentiality, and also, you know, what I call use and judgment. Also, trust your gut and to the best of your ability use evidence-based techniques. Know why you're doing what you're doing. If you're trying to help a parent navigate mode of communication and they're trying to process, okay, what should I choose for my child? How do we take our own bias out of that and present data in a way? And how do we know our own bias, right? How do we know? I have a bias. I know my bias. So I have to actively work against that because it's not about me. It's about the family trusting that I'm presenting them all of the information, and that's really hard. The last is kind of trusting yourself. You know, as a new therapist, as somebody new to the area of hearing loss, I sometimes doubt my ability. Like, have I been in this field long enough? And then I have to say, yes, I've worked with families and kids for many years. This is a different population, but what works for families may work for kids with hearing loss. So it's also your ability to trust your own self and your own self-efficacy or your own belief that you can do this job. The last and my most favorite thing to talk about, because I love thinking about communication, is effective communication. And there's lots of little things that make a difference. I remember asking a mom in one of the panels that I did, I said, what did you love the most about working with me in early intervention? And I did this in front of, 15 math students, and who knows what she was going to say. It was very risky to even ask her. And she said to me, she said, I love that you love my kid. It wasn't that I taught her kid how to talk, which I did. I mean, she taught her kid how to talk, but I taught her all the tools, and Vic's kid rocked fast. He was awesome. It wasn't that. It wasn't the fact that he was entering kindergarten where he should have been. Like, it wasn't all of these amazing, amazing developmental milestones. She loved the fact that I loved her kid, and I did. I truly loved him. And I think that fact came from the communication. So I was friendly. I shared a little bit of myself. I remember I was pregnant, and at the time, and I was like, what kind of diapers? I don't even know what kind of diapers I should be wearing. And then the mom became like, she loved that she could be an expert in something because this was her third kid, right? And so then she was saying, oh my gosh, here are the 3 diapers, the Huggies, and well, and she was like, here's the one I recommend. I was like, that's so helpful. And then the next week she's like, I'm also thinking that you probably know nothing about bottles. Like, here's my recommendation. So then it was so nice that we could spend 5 minutes and she could be the expert in something. And it made her, those like little communication, those little moments for informal communication made our relationship, our partnership stronger because I was sharing a little piece of myself and she was able to be the expert in something. When you're coming into parents' homes, it's such a personal thing. And to just show up there and, do the job and then leave, it's a weird thing. And so I understand a lot that people have very strong opinions about personal and professional boundaries, and I respect that. But I also think there is a place where we can be just a little more human and a little more informal because these are people and we're in their homes. So I always try to listen to before stating my own perspective. So oftentimes I ask an open question. So I'll just say, like, how did that session feel? Or what are you thinking about his or her progress? Because I want to know a family member's perspective or a provider, particularly one that I might not agree with. I want to know where they're coming from before I make assumptions and go on and on about why I believe the way I believe. Because what they say to me may influence how then I frame my own perspective. I try to also avoid jargon as best I can. I'm very good at this, so much so that when I try to give an academic talk, I say things like tiny humans, and people are like, do you mean children? So I feel like now I've done the reverse, and that I think it's important to really explain things in ways that everybody can understand. The last one kind of relates to what we've already been talking about. So this is one of the hardest things, I think, is how can you be straightforward but also tactful? How can you be really honest, not sugarcoating it, but also not devastate families, not devastate or not be confrontational? How do you convey hard to receive information in sensitive ways? It's really, really tough. And then this is the one that the strategy I have used throughout my entire existence, and it has always worked for me, is that I am never afraid to say I have no idea. I have no idea the answer to that question. I don't pretend, because that type of being honest will always work in my best interest, because parents then know, wow, she didn't know that. She's going to find that out for me, so that when I do give them an answer, they then trust that what I'm saying is true, that I have evidence or data or experience to support the answer to their question. So we already talked about this a little bit, but I think it's really important to set up these like informal chats, these little connections with people, that because we're humans first. Above all else, we crave connections and interactions. And so a lot of times this happens at the beginning and the session, and this kind of face-to-face interaction is important. I think you can connect with everybody, and you have to find that commonality regardless of how different you may appear. I tell this story of I'm at Home Depot, I'm at the DMV, which, you know, is a lovely experience. And this lady, I'm making small talk. I'm like, if you're on the holidays, I'm like, oh, is it really busy? It seems busy. It's like the holidays. No. Like, oh, was that weather? Yeah. Nothing. I'm not connecting. Finally, I noticed a fan. And I'm like, this place smells like crap. But it's so smart that you have a fan. And literally, she looks at me, she's like, I know, right? This is the stinkiest place ever. I'm like, totally. I don't know how you work here. And then it was like a 20-minute interaction about, like, how, like, she uses the fan and why she got the fan. And I was this way, like, I could not handle not connecting with this lady at the DMV. So finally, it was over the stinky DMV that I was able to connect over this fan. My point of the story is we can connect with people on all levels, all types of people, even if it's just on one level. And it's finding that one thing that you have in common as often is the basis for building relationships, I think. So a lot of times we ask questions as a way to get information. And how you ask the question is really can influence the response, how they respond. So a question like, why did you do that, maybe seems confrontational, whereas like, tell me more about, you know, this goal. I'm interested in knowing kind of what you're thinking about that. Sounds very different than, well, why are you doing that? Oftentimes, we also ask a lot of closed questions. So, does that feel good? And then that's like a yes or no. Or are you happy with your therapist, or yes or no? And that doesn't leave enough openings for us to really understand what is happening. And it kind of cuts down the conversation. So generally, I limit my closed questions and ask mostly open-ended questions. How's, you know, Ginger's eating going? Or tell me more about blah, blah, blah. I'm interested in learning more about how he does this. I always try to say things in positive rather than negatives, and always working with, you know, within the context of, you know, different parents have different comfort levels and with regard to how much they want to share. The other, in addition to using open questions, so tell me more about that, or why are you, you know, what do you think is going on here? So oftentimes a great example is, you know, if a kid is demonstrating a disruptive behavior, a lot of times, even if I know the answer to the question, I may say to a parent, what do you think is going on here? And then that helps the parent sort of start to unpack, okay, why is this behavior happening? How might I, going about, like, what are some strategies we might use together? But it also helps me understand where the parent is at in terms of how they're interpreting their child's behavior. Same thing with providers. So it may be that you're working with a provider and they're doing this approach, and it may be like, you know, why do you think he's, you know, not making progress in, you know, in his imitation of whatever environmental sounds or his awareness of what do you think is going on there? And so to understand what they perceive the barriers are and what their plan of attack is or approach kind of helps to get to the bottom of it. And also it helps us to understand, well, what is their thought process and where kind of they're going from there. Another thing that I do is I try to restate things, because oftentimes in my brain I'm interpreting it one way, and they have a whole different approach. So I often try to say things up. Let me just make sure I understand. It sounds like you're saying blah blah blah. Is that right? And then sometimes I'm right, and then sometimes I'm wrong. But it helps me kind of check in, acknowledge what they're feeling and thinking, but also a way to make sure, are we on the same page? Are we both interpreting the same thing in the same in the same way. So I think a lot about words. I spend way too much time thinking exactly about phrasing things. And so the traditional approach usually is a parent saying, what should I do about blah? And a professional saying, I would recommend X. What you need is X. And what I would encourage us all to do, even a professional working with a professional, I do this all the time with students, is when somebody asks me, what should I do about blah? I try to rephrase and say something like, let's see if we can figure out this together. What's been going on? What do you think? Why do you think it's not working so well? And so it takes a lot longer, but we get to a place of empowerment whereby the other person I'm working with then feels like, you know what, I really actually do understand more. I actually bring more to the table than I think, but I wouldn't know all of that if I had just given the answer. So I use a series of guiding questions by which I try to understand what the parent or the professional has already been thinking about and already knows, and then together it feels like we make the plan together. By making plans together, by making decisions together, you're increasing the likelihood that everybody will buy in. Who likes to be told what to do? I don't like to be told what to do. Whereas if together, I feel like we've made a plan and we're all on the same page, it's more likely that everybody will do what we decided as a team versus one expert telling the rest of the team what to do. This relates to seeking understanding. So taking the time to really listen and to know, okay, so I have parents all the time ask me, you know, is my child going to go to regular kindergarten? And what are they really asking here? Are they asking about, was my child really wanting to go to kindergarten, or what are they really communicating? They're worried that their kid is going to be happy and successful. And so how do what is it they're really asking, and how can I address the underlying reason, not the question itself? Is what are they really meaning when they're asking that question? Oftentimes parents want to work on goals that I think are absolutely inappropriate. Many of them having to do with manners. I want my kid to say, in the past it was yes ma'am, no sir, up here is please and thank you. If the kid doesn't have any words yet, that's about the last thing I personally want to work on. But you know, if we talk about, okay, what is your goal? And the parent says, I really want my child to tell me what he wants and needs. Then when the issue of they're saying please and thank you so much, then we can bring it back to the common goals of remember when we were talking about our goals of wanting him to say his wants and needs, you know, in this situation, would you rather him use a specific word like banana or the word please? And then just talking through. And most of the times parents will say, no, I'd much rather him say banana. But in the moment, they're wanting the kid to say please or thank you. So understanding kind of why they want the specific goals helps us be able to provide better strategies. So disagreements always happen. They do. I've never been on a place where everybody disagrees, mainly because that's when growth happens. Disagreements often happen when everybody cares so much and everyone is really trying to think critically about the best approach, and sometimes people, butt heads and they don't agree. So this is so hard, but I always fight the urge to convince. And what I mean there is I try never to make it seem like I'm trying to get everybody else on board. I want to provide information and then say whatever we decide as a group, and I'll drink the Kool-Aid, but here is what I'm thinking and here's why I'm thinking. And it's about, really my goal is for everybody to understand my point of view, not necessarily agree with my point of view. And once everyone feels like they have been understood and their opinions are respected, then they're more likely to hear another point of view. And so that's why the concept of really making sure everybody understands everybody else, even if they don't agree with it, is super important when working with a team and making team decisions. It's really interesting about feelings. Again, hypothetical, no answer, actually, has anyone ever been with a friend Like you call them up and you have a horrible day and you're just like, oh my gosh. Like today, for example, I was running because I was running late to pick up my tiny people and I tripped and fell on the sidewalk. I look like a unicorn because I have a huge bump on my head. Both my knees are scraped. My pants are ripped. My hands are bloody. And I just want to vent about, like, my bad day. And I, like, call my sister up, and she is like, well, if you weren't running, maybe, and she's trying to fix me. And I'm like, no, I just want you to tell me, Megan, your day sounds horrible. I'm so sorry I had that bad day. Like, you know, like, I hope tomorrow's better for you. But, yeah, your day, you just want somebody to acknowledge, like, yes, I have a right to feel like today was bad. I look like a unicorn because I smashed my face. I don't want to go under the fact that I should be wearing high heels because I'm clumsy. Like, that's not what I need. What I need in this moment is somebody realize I'm having a bad day. When parents express, like, I'm overwhelmed, they just want someone to stay in that space with them and be like, yes, you are overwhelmed. I can't even begin to imagine what it feels like to have all of the things that you are dealing with. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to help. But, yeah, it's hard. What you're dealing with right now is hard. And so I always use things like I can only imagine. I don't ever want to say I completely understand. I have no idea. I will never be able to completely understand. I never say everything will be okay, relax, don't stress. I hate all of those things. They don't ever help. It's about look on the bright side. No. What we want to say is stay in that space with the family and just accept how they're feeling, because then parents will feel like they can be more, or professionals too, just more vulnerable or more real with us. The last thing I want to talk about is what I call help-giving practices. And this is a concept I learned about in my PhD program, and I didn't know it when I was a provider, but I really love this area of work. Carl Dunst has done a lot of work in this area, and I love what we call kind of these, I love talking about enabling practices. So when working with families or even providers, people in general, the goal should be about creating opportunities for people to acquire their own problem-solving skills, their own competencies, so that they themselves can solve the problem. So we want each individual to be able to attain what's in their own best interest, their own sense of self-control, their own self-efficacy. We don't want them to be dependent on it. As much as great as it feels to be the expert and the person that knows all the answers, the most amazing feeling is when you have worked with a parent such that they are able to advocate for themselves, teach their child the words, be both an interventionist and an advocate, and to know when they need help and know when they are really good at something. That is the most reinforcing thing. It's much harder than being the expert and the parent just comes to you for advice. But working with a parent so that they gain those skills themselves is one of the coolest things I've ever had the privilege to do. So there's a lot of data. I had to have one slide with data because I'm a super data nerd, and this is my one data slide. So these enabling practices that we just talked about are really, they explain most of parents' empowerment. So basically, the more enabling practices you use, the more empowered parents feel, and that is really cool. So the point of this being is that when we use these specific strategies, it really has an impact on parents' own perception of their own ability. So all this to say, it's super important. So some ineffective practices are kind of promoting this learned helplessness, right? So the help seeker often is like a parent or provider. And if we are just always giving answers and not helping them think through the problem, we're creating a situation of what we kind of call learned helplessness, kind of fostering dependencies or taking this kind of authoritative or paternalistic approach also is not great. They reduce self-esteem by conveying a sense of superiority, a sense of like indebtedness of like, oh, this person is helping me, you know, providing all these services. And then the last thing is there's a lot of data to support what we call contingent and non-contingent help giving. And what that means is basically if somebody asks your opinion and you give it versus just giving your opinion in the absence of them requesting it, the situation in which the help giving is contingent upon a parental or professional, requesting that information, they're much more likely to follow through. And so then if you just offer your advice. So with that said, then my job is to always ask them a series of questions through which then they're about to ask me a question. So I'll give an example. I work also with children with autism. So, actually, I'll give an example with a kid that had a progressive hearing loss. And the mom was in a little bit of, I think, denial that her son was, I believe, having a progressive hearing loss. And so what I really wanted to say to her is, you need to get his hearing tested. But I knew if I just offered that, he would be less likely to comply. So I asked a series of questions related to, I noticed that when I came in the room, he's no longer kind of looking towards the door to see me. And she said, yeah, he's been doing that a lot. The dog's barking and he's not turning anymore. And I said, what do you think that's about? And she's like, I'm worried about that maybe his hearing is getting worse. I'm like, yeah, I think I'm sort of worried about that too. What are you thinking? And she's like, well, I'm just so worried. I'm just nervous about that. Maybe I should find out if his hearing is getting worse. And I said, yeah, maybe so. I'm happy to go with you to the appointment, or happy to set it up with you. What do you think about that? And she's like, yeah, I think I probably need to go in and do another follow-up hearing test. And so rather than just saying, like, I'm noticing that your child's hearing is getting worse, your kid needs to go back to their audiologist, it was a series of these, like, open, guided questions for her to feel like, oh, wow, look at me. I am identifying that my kid is not doing the same behaviors that he was doing 2 months ago, and I had this idea to come up with going to see an audiologist. Like, I have power to be able to advocate for my son and to know when he needs help, and I did that on my own. I mean, yes, I scaffolded it, but from the parent's perspective, it's just a different sense of empowerment, and it's subtle, but it's super important. I also talk about this a lot. I'm sort of a radical, and I know that about myself. That's my bias. I actually think that we can sometimes do harm when we become the expert. So if we just go into the session, and y'all know this about me, hopefully, I believe in empowering parents and working directly with families. I don't believe in the model where I work directly with the kid for the majority of the session. I just don't do that. If a kid does a great job in a session with me and the parent struggles, that threatens their sense of competence at a level that it's so hard, right? And so if the parent is the primary communication partner, the primary person interacting with the child, and they all of a sudden feel like they're not doing a good job, that changes 95% of that child's interactions, because the person that they're interacting with the most now all of a sudden feels like they're not doing a good job. And so as providers, I think it's our job to really promote the sense of you as the parent are awesome. You have many skills, and it's our job together to think about what are some things that are going really well and that we can do more, and what are some things that maybe aren't going so well and we can do something different, rather than parents being the model by which this child only does well with the therapist. So, 9 minutes there. I hope this was helpful, and that this is helpful in terms of teaming. This is, as I kind of said, one of the hardest things we do. Nobody ever, at least for me, I didn't get a lot of education on working with adults. I have a lot of information on kids, and so working with the providers and families is, I think, one of the hardest things I do, but also one of the most rewarding and awesome things I do. So I'm happy to answer questions or talk about situations or whatever may be, or the post test. Am I supposed to do that? Maybe I'll do the post test. Whatever I'm supposed to do, I'm happy to do right now.
All right, so let's start. Does anyone have questions for Megan?
This is Allie. I have a question.
Great.
Should I go ahead? Okay, so what happens if you're trying to get information from the parent and trying to establish a connection with them, and you're asking open-ended questions, but their answers are still kind of one-worded or great, you know, not really much more in depth. Like, it's just really hard to establish. Like, what would you recommend to continue and trying to pull things out? I don't know if the family is just really overwhelmed or if they're focusing because there's additional medical issues, so I don't know if they're just focused more on that than the child's hearing loss, so they can't even really worry about that right now or what the deal is, but it's always like a one-word kind of answer.
That's a great question, and I want to be explicit in the fact that there are some people that are just that are hard to connect with, right? That you can do all of the strategies, the maximal strategies to get those answers, and parents still just for whatever reason can't get there. And so this isn't perfect. And it may be that you're doing everything and that all you can get is one-word answers, and that's okay because you and your brain will know, I tried my best. I think switching gears and maybe asking a question that might not be related to a topic that's hard but also open-ended, and if they say more about that, would give you information about, is this just that their communication style, or is this the topic that's uncomfortable for them? So even something about like, tell me what your kid's favorite thing to do is, right? Or tell me something that's like less stressful. If they're able to talk about that, but not talk about these other kind of higher risk, higher stress situations. But if they're always giving word answers regardless of the topic, that may just be their communication style, that personality, and something we can't change. Versus what you were so brilliantly alluding to is like, is it the topic that's freaking them out, or is it just their communication style? Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah, totally. Thanks.
Great question and suggestion. Anyone else?
Hi, it's Eva.
Hi, Eva, go for it.
So I just wanted to kind of comment on when you were saying that when we're trying to kind of, you know, respond to their feelings and stuff, and then, you know, where we say it must be really hard to blank, blank, blank. And then you were saying that they were kind of like, not to say oh, I completely understand. I think in our case, like what I found being the parent guide, a lot of the parents are actually kind of looking for some of that reassurance because we have been there and done that. So I think that's kind of like the difference between us and then say, you know, like the professionals being the ENT or the audiologist who don't have a child with a hearing loss. So is there kind of like not a limit, but just kind of like a guideline to where we kind of say, you know, where we kind of stop sharing our experience?
Yeah, that's so smart, because it's a fine line, right, of like wanting the parent not to feel like they're alone, right, that they're not the only one that's dealing with something that's really stressful often. There's that, but then there's also like making it not about yourself, making it about them, and I think that's really smart and brilliant and a really fine line. And I think I always err on the side, but I'm an oversharer. I've always been that way. I actually think in your situation, saying something like, every situation is different, everybody processes things differently, I have been through a similar whatever, I remember feeling experiences like this, and I also remember those feelings going away. I'm happy to tell you more about my experience. I'm happy to just stay in this space with you, and if you want to vent, I'm happy to do that too. Tell me what would be helpful for you. You know what I mean? Because I think each person is different. Some people want to hear and want to know that another person's been through this and it's been okay. Some other people are just so caught up in the moment themselves and can't see anything other than their own experience and just need somebody to listen to what they're going through. But I think by being explicit about like, what do you need from me right now, that helps you frame your answer depending on a family. And I think it will depend differently by each family. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love that answer. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, anyone else? Megan, I have to say, I love that you addressed the fact that parents feeling unsuccessful when their kid does something with the therapist that they don't do at home, and situations like that, because that can truly affect the parent's morale and then what happens when they return home, or, you know, when the therapist isn't there.
Yeah, it's one of the things I see so many times, and it makes me so unbelievably sad because, and here's the thing, everyone's doing it, everyone has the same idea, right? No one is that intended, right? Everyone's trying to focus on the child, but they don't. I think sometimes people forget how fragile parents are. These are anyone who has these are our babies. Like, to not be a good parent, to not be successful in whatever form is so awful as a parent. And to see someone else be better with your own kid is just not fun. And I can't imagine, like, having a situation in some extremes where my child only communicates with somebody effectively that's not me. That could be devastating for that relationship.
Absolutely. All right. Well, if we don't have any more questions, we'll move ahead to the post-test. And if you want to move to the next slide and read question 1, that would be fabulous.
Will do. Question 1, what should you consider when setting up a relationship with a provider? A, expectations. B, communication. C, how to make decisions. D, how to set goals. E, all of the above. F, none of the above.
Okay, question 2.
What is a principle of effective partnerships? A, trust. B, caring. C, intelligence. D, shared interests. E, all of the above. F, none of the above.
All right, 3.
What type of question is most effective at eliciting conversation? A, nonverbal cues. B, open questions. C, closed questions. D, rhetorical questions. E, all of the above. F, none of the above.
Question 4.
What are effective help-giving practices? Offering unsolicited advice. B, providing an expert opinion. C, taking control of the situation to solve the problem. D, promoting an individual's ability to attain what is in hers or her best interest. E, all of the above. F, none of the above.
Question 5.
Whose opinion should carry the most weight? The family member, the provider, A, the family member, B, the provider, C, neither, D, both, E, this question is silly since we're supposed to be a team.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Megan, for presenting tonight. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.